put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The name that bought nations. In 1815, a single man stood in the London fog with knowledge that would make him the richest banker in Europe. Nathan Rothschild knew Napoleon had fallen at Waterloo before the British government did. What he did next would birth 2 centuries of conspiracy theories, accusations of world domination, and questions that still echo through the corridors of power today. But here's what the conspiracies won't tell you. The real story is darker, stranger, and more calculated than any myth. The Rothschild name carries weight that transcends banking. It whispers through history like smoke through a closed door, never quite visible but always present. For 200 years, this single family has been blamed for everything, from financing wars to controlling governments, from engineering economic collapses to puppeteering world leaders. The internet explodes with theories. They own the Federal Reserve. They orchestrate revolutions. They control $500 trillion in hidden wealth. But conspiracy theories are seductive, precisely because they contain a grain of truth wrapped in layers of fiction. The real question isn't whether the Rothschilds held power. They absolutely did. The question is, what did they actually do with it? And why has their name become synonymous with secret cabals and financial manipulation? This is a dark business story about the architecture of modern banking, about how one family understood something about information and money that would reshape global finance forever. This is about the birth of financial mythology, about how real wealth and power gets obscured by conspiracy theories that serve to hide something more disturbing. The actual mechanisms by which banking dynasties operate. Because the truth about the Rothschilds isn't a simple tale of villains or victims. It's a business documentary about how perception becomes reality, how antisemitism warps economic history, and how the real dark side of business isn't always what the myths claim. Frankfurt, 1744. A child is born in the Jewish ghetto, a cramped quarter where opportunity dies young and ambition suffocates behind locked gates. His name is Meyer Amschel Rothschild, and he will die as one of the most powerful men in Europe, without ever escaping the shadow of antisemitism that follows his family like a curse. But Meyer understands something. The aristocrats around him don't. Information travels faster than armies, and money moves faster than kings. Meyer starts as a coin dealer, a modest trade dealing in rare currencies and antiques for wealthy collectors. He catches the eye of Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, a connection that opens doors previously barred to Jewish businessmen. But Meyer's real genius isn't in coins. It's in recognizing that Europe's fragmented kingdoms and constant wars create opportunities for those willing to move money across borders. He doesn't just lend money, he builds a network. Here's where the business strategy gets interesting, where lessons on power and wealth begin to emerge from the shadows. Meyer has 5 sons, and he deploys them like pieces on a chessboard across Europe's financial capitals. Amschel in Frankfurt, Salomon in Vienna, Nathan in London, Karl in Naples, James in Paris. This isn't just family business. This is the creation of the world's first multinational banking empire. A web of intelligence and capital that can move faster than any government's official channels. The Rothschild competitive advantage is brutally simple: speed and information. While competitors wait for official dispatches, the Rothschilds maintain private couriers, carrier pigeons, and a communication network that operates in the shadows of legitimate commerce. They know bond prices before markets open, troop movements before generals report them, political decisions before ambassadors announce them. In an age where information takes days or weeks to travel, the Rothschilds measure their advantage in hours. This is where myth and reality begin their dangerous dance, where the dark business documentary must separate fact from antisemitic fiction. June 18th, 1815. The fields of Waterloo run red with blood as Napoleon Bonaparte faces his final defeat against the Duke of Wellington and Prussian forces. Across the English Channel, Nathan Rothschild waits in London, knowing that the outcome of this battle will determine the financial future of Europe. British government bonds, called consols, hang in the balance. If Napoleon wins, they'll collapse. If Wellington prevails, they'll soar. The legend says, Nathan Rothschild received news of Wellington's victory through his private courier network, a full day before the British government knew the outcome. According to conspiracy theories that persist to this day, Nathan stood on the floor of the London Stock Exchange and began selling consols, creating panic that Napoleon had won. As prices crashed, the story goes, he secretly bought up massive quantities at rock-bottom prices, then revealed Wellington's victory, watching his new holdings soar in value. One transaction, the myth claims, made the Rothschilds the richest family in Europe and gave them control over the British economy. Here's the first dark revelation, the first thread we must pull to unravel 2 centuries of conspiracy. This story is almost certainly false. Historians have examined the evidence exhaustively, and the tale doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Contemporary records show Nathan Rothschild didn't dramatically profit from Waterloo through market manipulation. The timeline doesn't work, the financial records don't support it, and the only sources citing this story emerge decades later, often from anti-Semitic publications seeking to paint Jewish bankers as parasites who profit from Christian bloodshed. But, and this is where the real business thriller begins, the Rothschilds absolutely did know about Waterloo before the government. They absolutely did have superior information networks. And they absolutely did use those advantages to dominate European finance for the next century. The myth obscures something more disturbing than market manipulation. It hides the actual source of Rothschild power, which was far more sophisticated and far more permanent than a single trade. The real Rothschild wealth came from financing governments during the Napoleonic Wars and the Reconstruction that followed. While other banks focused on short-term loans to merchants, the Rothschilds understood that nations at war needed capital desperately and would pay premium interest rates for the privilege. They financed British subsidies to continental allies, arranged loans for European governments, and became indispensable to the machinery of state power. By the 1820s, the Rothschild family had accumulated wealth estimated at over $5 billion in today's dollars, making them richer than any monarch in Europe, except the Russian Tsar. But here's what makes this a lesson on power and greed. They weren't just rich. They were structurally embedded in how governments functioned. You couldn't wage war without Rothschild capital. You couldn't stabilize currency without Rothschild gold. You couldn't finance infrastructure without Rothschild bonds. This is the business strategy that conspiracy theories miss. The Rothschilds didn't control governments through shadowy manipulation. They made themselves necessary through systematic financial innovation. But necessity breeds resentment, and resentment in 19th century Europe finds its most toxic expression in anti-Semitism. Here's where the story turns darker, where we must confront something uglier than corporate scandal or financial mystery. The Rothschild conspiracy theories aren't really about banking at all. In 1846, a French socialist named Georges Derneville publishes a pamphlet with a title that would echo through history: Histoire édifiante et curieuse de Rothschild Mio, Roi des Juifs. The edifying and curious history of Rothschild the Firm, King of the Jews. The text is venomous, claiming the Rothschilds manipulate European politics from the shadows, that they orchestrate wars for profit, that they represent a Jewish conspiracy to dominate Christian civilization. This isn't financial criticism. It's the blueprint for 2 centuries of antisemitic mythology. The themes Dernvale establishes become templates. Jewish bankers as parasites, secret cabals controlling governments, loyalty to tribe over nation, manipulation of Christian society for alien ends. These accusations spread through European culture like poison through groundwater, seeping into everything from newspaper cartoons to political movements. By the late 19th century, the Rothschilds appear in anti-Semitic propaganda across Europe. They're accused of starting the American Civil War to profit from Reconstruction, of controlling the Bank of England, of engineering financial crises to consolidate power. None of these accusations have factual basis, but they don't need facts. They need fear. They need a villain. They need an explanation for why the world feels chaotic and unfair. In 1903, the most dangerous conspiracy theory in history emerges from Russia. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a fabricated document claiming to reveal a Jewish plot for world domination. Though exposed as a fraud almost immediately, it spreads globally, translated into dozens of languages, cited by everyone from Henry Ford to Adolf Hitler. The Rothschilds feature prominently in these fantasies, not as bankers but as puppet masters, arch-conspirators, the hidden hand behind world events. This is the hidden darkness in the Rothschild story, the part conspiracy theorists won't acknowledge. The conspiracy theories themselves aren't harmless speculation. They're recycled anti-Semitic propaganda that led directly to pogroms, persecutions, and ultimately, the Holocaust. When someone today claims the Rothschilds control the Federal Reserve or orchestrate world events, they're not engaging in financial analysis. They're repeating talking points crafted by 19th century antisemites and 20th century Nazis. But here's the uncomfortable truth that makes this a real business documentary. The Rothschilds did wield enormous power, and that power wasn't always used for noble purposes. In the 1830s, the Rothschilds financed Belgian independence, not out of democratic idealism, but because it served their commercial interests. They funded railway construction across Europe, becoming the single largest investor in 19th century infrastructure, a monopoly that gave them influence over economic development across the continent. They financed the British purchase of the Suez Canal in 1875, a transaction that consolidated British imperial power and reshaped Middle Eastern geopolitics for the next century. These aren't conspiracy theories. They're documented business transactions that demonstrate real power, real influence, real consequences for millions of people who had no say in decisions made in Rothschild banking houses. The family used their capital to shape political outcomes, to reward friendly governments with loans and punish hostile ones with credit restrictions. When Belgium needed recognition as an independent nation, Rothschild capital made it possible. When Austria needed to stabilize after revolutionary upheaval, Rothschild loans came with conditions that protected banking interests. When Brazil needed to finance modernization, Rothschild terms ensured profitable returns, regardless of local economic impact. This is the real lesson on power that gets lost in conspiracy theories. You don't need secret cabals when you have structural leverage. You don't need shadowy manipulation when governments depend on your capital. You don't need conspiracies when the system itself gives you disproportionate influence. The Rothschilds understood what modern critics of capitalism still struggle to articulate. In a debt-based financial system, creditors don't just lend money, they lend power, and that power comes with strings attached. By the 1870s, the Rothschild empire reaches its zenith. They control an estimated 40% of the world's wealth, a concentration of capital unprecedented in human history. Their banking houses in London, Paris, Vienna, Frankfurt, and Naples operate as a single coordinated entity, moving gold and bonds across borders with a sophistication that won't be matched until the digital age. But empires that rise on information advantages face an inevitable problem. Information doesn't stay exclusive forever. The late 19th century brings technological disruption: telegraphs, transatlantic cables, faster ships, better communication infrastructure. The Rothschild courier network, once the fastest in Europe, becomes obsolete almost overnight. Other banks adopt their strategies: multinational operations, government financing, coordinated family management. The competitive advantage that built the empire begins to erode. By 1900, American banks, J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, emerge as rivals with deeper capital reserves and fewer aristocratic pretensions. The Rothschilds remain wealthy, remain influential, but they're no longer dominant. Their banking operations gradually contract, focusing on private wealth management and specialized financial services, rather than financing empires. But here's the twist that reveals the ultimate darkness in this story. As Rothschild actual power declined, the conspiracy theories about them intensified. In the 20th century, as the family's banking influence shrinks to a fraction of its former dominance, the myths grow exponentially. Nazi propaganda portrays them as puppet masters of global Jewish conspiracy, citing their 19th century prominence as evidence of continued secret control. Soviet propaganda claims they represent capitalist parasitism and Western imperialism. Arab nationalism blames them for supporting Zionism and Israeli statehood. American conspiracy theorists accuse them of controlling the Federal Reserve, despite having no formal role in its creation or operation. The Internet age amplifies these theories exponentially. YouTube videos claim they own $500 trillion in hidden wealth, more than global GDP. Websites list every central bank they supposedly control, despite no evidence of ownership or management. Social media posts blame them for engineering world wars, orchestrating the 9/11 attacks, creating COVID-19, manipulating elections, controlling media, financing terrorism. Accusations that contradict each other, but share a common thread of antisemitic scapegoating. Here's the psychological insight that makes this a lesson on wealth and power. Conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds persist not because they're true, but because they're useful. They provide simple explanations for complex problems, clear villains for diffuse anxieties, and most dangerously, they redirect legitimate anger about economic inequality away from systemic analysis toward anti-Semitic scapegoating. When someone loses their home in a financial crisis, it's psychologically easier to blame a shadowy banking dynasty than to understand mortgage-backed securities, regulatory capture, and structural failures in modern capitalism. When wages stagnate and opportunity contracts, it's simpler to imagine secret cabals than to analyze globalization, automation, and the political choices that shape economic policy. The Rothschild conspiracy theories offer emotional satisfaction at the cost of actual understanding. But here's what makes this more than just a story about anti-Semitism. Here's the part that reveals the real dark side of business. Focusing on Rothschild conspiracy theories obscures legitimate questions about banking power, generational wealth, and financial influence. The actual Rothschild family today operates Rothschild & Company, a boutique investment bank with about $100 billion in assets under management, significant but dwarfed by giants like J.P. Morgan Chase with $3.7 trillion, or BlackRock with $9 trillion. They're wealthy, certainly. Estimated family wealth ranges from $1 to $2 billion, spread across dozens of descendants. But they're not even in the top 50 richest families globally. The conspiracy theories insist they hide trillions in secret wealth, but this claim requires believing they're simultaneously powerful enough to control global finance, while incompetent enough to let Forbes and Bloomberg completely miss their holdings. It requires imagining they orchestrate world events while maintaining zero digital footprint. No documentary evidence, no whistleblowers, and no mistakes across centuries of supposed manipulation. The more rational explanation is simpler but less emotionally satisfying. The Rothschilds were successful 19th century bankers who understood information asymmetry and government finance, accumulated enormous wealth during an era of limited banking competition, then gradually became less dominant as financial markets evolved and new players emerged with different advantages. Their real story is actually more interesting than the conspiracy theories. The Rothschilds pioneered financial instruments that became standard practice: government bond markets, international syndicated loans, risk sharing across multiple institutions, coordinated multinational operations. They demonstrated how information advantages create profitable opportunities in volatile markets. They showed how family networks could maintain trust and coordination in an era before modern corporate governance. They proved that lending to governments during crises could be spectacularly profitable if you had the capital reserves to wait out defaults and restructuring. These are real business lessons, real strategy insights, real financial innovations, but they get buried under layers of conspiratorial fiction. The tragedy of the Rothschild story is that legitimate criticism of 19th century banking practices, the way creditors shaped policy, the extractive nature of international loans, the concentration of financial power in a few hands, gets poisoned by antisemitism until it becomes impossible to discuss rationally. When activists today criticize central banking, quantitative easing, or the Federal Reserve's relationship with private banks, adding Rothschild conspiracy theories doesn't strengthen the argument. It discredits it by association with antisemitic propaganda. When economists analyze wealth inequality and generational concentration of capital, invoking secret Rothschild trillions doesn't illuminate the issue. It obscures actual data about how wealth compounds and perpetuates across generations. The real dark side of business visible in the Rothschild story isn't secret cabals. It's how creditor power shapes political outcomes in ways that are completely legal and entirely devastating. It's how information advantages get monetized without regulation. It's how generational wealth perpetuates influence across centuries. It's how banking dynasties make themselves structurally necessary to government functioning. These are real problems worthy of serious analysis, but conspiracy theories make that analysis impossible. In 1938, the Nazis seized Rothschild assets in Austria, looting art collections, confiscating businesses, destroying centuries of accumulated wealth in one of history's most extensive property thefts. Louis Nathaniel de Rothschild is imprisoned, his release ransomed for the family's Austrian banking operations. Everything they built in Vienna, liquidated at gunpoint. This is what conspiracy theories ultimately enable: violence justified by fictional accusations of secret power. The Nazis claimed they were liberating Germany from Jewish banking control while literally stealing Rothschild property. The propaganda worked precisely because it built on centuries of conspiracy theories that portrayed Jewish bankers as parasites, manipulators, enemies of Christian civilization. After World War II, the Rothschilds rebuild, but never to their former dominance. The French branch survives nationalization in 1981. Reforms as Rothschild and Sier Bank continues operations. The British branch merges operations, focuses on advisory services, private wealth management, boutique investment banking. The family remains wealthy, influential in financial circles, but operates in a world where Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, HSBC, and sovereign wealth funds wield far greater capital and influence. Today, Rothschild & Company employs about 3,800 people globally, advises on mergers and acquisitions, manages wealth for ultra-high net worth clients, operates in a specialized niche of modern finance. They're successful, certainly, but claiming they control world finance requires ignoring the actual distribution of banking power in the 21st century. Yet the conspiracy theories persist, evolve, adapt to new media. Every financial crisis brings new accusations. They crashed the 2008 housing market. They manipulate cryptocurrency markets. They orchestrate inflation. They profit from wars they supposedly engineer. Evidence doesn't matter. The myth is self-sustaining, impervious to facts, reinforced by confirmation bias and algorithmic amplification. This is the ultimate lesson on power and greed the Rothschild story teaches. Sometimes the most profitable conspiracy isn't the one being committed, it's the one being sold. Conspiracy theories generate clicks, views, engagement, monetization. They sell books, drive speaking tours, build entire media empires on manufactured outrage and fictional villains. The people promoting Rothschild conspiracy theories today aren't necessarily antisemitic true believers. Many are entrepreneurs who discovered that fear and anger are profitable, that simple stories sell better than complex analysis, that accusations require no proof, while truth requires exhaustive documentation. The real manipulation isn't coming from banking dynasties, it's coming from conspiracy theorists who profit by keeping people angry, afraid, and convinced that secret cabals explain everything wrong in their lives. So what's the truth about the Rothschilds? They were brilliant 19th century bankers who built unprecedented wealth through financial innovation, superior information networks, and government lending during an era of constant European warfare. They absolutely wielded enormous power and used it to shape political outcomes in ways that benefited their interests. They faced antisemitism throughout their history, which both motivated their success. Exclusion from traditional aristocratic circles pushed them to innovate, and poisoned perceptions of their wealth, making them targets for anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that persist today. They don't control central banks, don't hide trillions in secret wealth, don't orchestrate world events from shadowy boardrooms. They're a wealthy family with a famous name, operating a successful but not dominant investment bank, in a financial world where hundreds of institutions wield comparable or greater influence. The conspiracy theories about them are almost entirely fiction, rooted in anti-Semitic propaganda that serves to distract from legitimate questions about how banking power actually functions, how wealth concentration actually occurs, how financial influence actually shapes policy. The dark side of business visible in the Rothschild story isn't what the conspiracy theorists claim. It's how creditor power operates in plain sight, how information advantages compound into dynastic wealth, how financial necessity gives private institutions public influence, and how anti-Semitism poisons economic discourse until rational analysis becomes impossible. The real lesson is this: if you want to understand financial power, study actual banking structures, regulatory frameworks, central bank policies, and documented relationships between private finance and government policy. If you want to fight economic inequality, focus on tax policy, wage laws, antitrust enforcement, and political choices about resource distribution. And if someone offers you a simple explanation that blames everything on one family secretly controlling the world, remember, the world is far more complex, far more bureaucratic, and far more boring than conspiracy theories suggest, but also far more unjust in ways that don't require secret cabals to explain. The Rothschilds built an empire on knowing what others didn't, on moving faster than competitors, on understanding that debt is power and information is wealth. Those lessons remain relevant, but they're business strategy lessons, not evidence of secret world domination. In the end, the most dangerous conspiracy isn't the one the Rothschilds supposedly orchestrated. It's the one that uses their name to obscure how financial power actually works, who actually benefits from current economic structures, and what we'd need to change if we wanted a more equitable distribution of wealth and opportunity. The fog of 1815 has long since lifted, but we're still living with the myths it spawned. Myths more profitable and more destructive than any single banking transaction could ever be. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.